So we're going to begin. Towards the end of Siman Tzadik Tes, and then we'll begin Siman Kof. Towards the end of Siman Tzadik Tes, we did have a whole discussion already about Bitul Isser Lechatchila, whether the Isser is the Raisa or Isser is the Rabbanan. It's a whole sugi in itself. And even if an Isser does become bottled, there's always the possibility, the potential of Choyze V'nir. And the way that works is because even though at one time something can be cancelled out by the din of Roiv or Shishim or whatever, there's always that a possibility that the Tam will come back, the Isser will somehow come back to life. In Bitul Isser, however, the discussion was also about if it could be done intentionally or not after it was mixed. After it's already mixed, but there's not enough, and the Mechaber was Mekel in Isur Shel Divrehim, if it's a Rabbanon. The Ramah says, of course, we don't distinguish. Regardless of the Isur, we don't add more to be Mevatalet intentionally. Nevertheless, this Bitul Isur is important for an additional reason, as we will see towards the end of Siman Tzadik Tes. There is a situation where there is some sort of bitul isser lechatchila, nonetheless. And that's Seif Zayin. At least it appears to be some sort of bitul isser. And that's the Seif that discusses im nivla isur mu'at letoch kli basar, if a little bit of isser was absorbed into a kli basar, into a pot of meat, in darko shel oiso kli lishtamesh bo b'shefa heter, if it is ordinarily used, that pot is ordinarily used b'shefa heter, with an abundant amount of heter, mutar l'shtamesh bo lechatchila, kiven she'isu mu'at, since we're only talking about a very minute amount of isser anyway. So what if it's minute? Well, since it's minute and you use it b'shefa, you could do it lechatchila, because ve'i efshar lo v'lidin esinas tam. In this case, you're never going to really come to a situation where there's going to be time to begin with. So that's why, even though you're being mevatalet in some ways, even though there is an Isser Balua there, and ordinarily, you have to make Hagala, you have to somehow get rid of it. Here, there's never a danger of having the Tam Isser. Therefore, it's okay to do it lechatchila. Lefichach, Isur mashu shenim lo begdero b'toch kankanim v'chayotze b'hem, mutar lishtamesh bo lechatchila. Therefore, if there is an Isser, a little bit, that was absorbed in ekder in the pot, or b'toch kankanim in jars, etc., mutar lishtamesh bo lechatchila ve'afilu ben yoyma, even during that day that it was used, lefi she'i efshar lo v'lidei desinas tam, because you can never come to tam. Aval in nivla b'chli shedarko lishtamesh leitim davar mu'et. But if it is a situation where it has been absorbed in a kli, where this kli is used at times for small amounts, you cook small amounts in this pot, keke'ara, like certain bowls, small pots, you cannot use it, even though you're going to use it now for a lot, and therefore not be concerned about the tam, but because there are times that you may use it for small amounts, we make a gzera. What's the gzera? Gzera shema yishtamesh bo bedavar mu'at. You may just end up, you may forget, and you may end up using it for a smaller amount, because that's what it's used sometimes for. And because of that, we don't allow you to do it lechatchila, even though you're going to do it b'shefa. But if it's a pot that you never use it for a small amount, this is a big pot, there's always a large amount, then go ahead, use it. So here we have an isser, here we have a din of lechatchila, and it's a chidush. There's no doubt that it's a chidush. So first, let's talk about the makor. What's the makor? What's the source of this? From where do we take it from? So this is all a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, a very interesting Gemara, that deals with Lamed Gimel, that deals with kankanim of yain of goyim. They have jars, large pitchers or jars of wine, which they use to hold the wine. And of course, after they've put the wine there, it doesn't stay there forever. They sell it, they transfer over to something else. And, they're blias. There are there's a little bit of the yain supposedly that is within the walls of the of the kankanim. Now, even though there was no cooking involved, it's sitting in a kankan. Nonetheless, there are ways that an Isser can become nivla in a pot even without the cooking process, right? With time, yeah. And what is that called? It's a form of kavush. In other words, you don't need cooking. The walls, regardless of what they're made of, pretty much, will absorb. It may take a little bit longer than cooking, of course, but at some point it will absorb something of whatever it is that you're putting in there. So here is very interesting. Based on this Gemara, the Gemara says that these kankanim of yain, you're allowed to add water. You're allowed to pour your water in there. Now, what's this problem? The problem, we're talking about yain of goyim here, right? That's the problem. So it's an isser. Nevertheless, go ahead and put your water in there. So, isn't that a problem? Why should you be able to put in water? So if you learn Rashi says that does not mean that this water is going to be there for you to drink, for you to use. Rashi goes along with the other portion of the Gemara that talks about a form of hechsher, of kelim. There's a form of hechsher kelim besides hagala, besides libun. There is milu ve'iroi. Milu ve'iroi for 3 days, every 24 hours. You put water in, you empty it out, put brand new water in, you empty it out, milui ve'iroi. And by the time you've done it for 3 times, 3 days, that has the power to cleanse the scalim of any blias of Isser. How? Because what we said, we're not talking about blias that came about through fire. And after all, we do have a klal, somewhat of a klal in Hagalas Kelim, that the hechsher is according to the way it was used. It's not exactly Kabbalah Kachpoltoi, exactly, because that's a slightly different halacha, but pretty much similar to that. In the same way that it is used, that is how the hechsher should come about. So here it's used b'tzoinen, even though it's kavush, nonetheless it helps. Milu ve'iri does help, and milu ve'iri, by the way, is used occasionally before Pesach for certain things that we want to be machmir, that we don't know if it helps, but maybe this one will help. Certain glass, certain crystal, and so forth. So it is a form of hechsher that is still being used today. So that's what Rashi seems to be saying. That's what the Gemara is talking about. And it does mention that later on. So that's all the Rashi says, that we're talking about milu ve'irui,
Let me ask you.
and not talking about drinking the water. Yes.
Since you mentioned
Right.
so the fire, if you have it for wine,
That's very good. Very true. Very true.
For Pesach actually anyway.
Yes.
And you can do,
No
24
problem.
hours, 3 days, 24
You
hours.
can, as far as I'm concerned, you can rinse it too.
Just
If you know for sure you've never used it for hot, why should you have to make a gala for it?
so you can let them
Or
warm
if you
hot water.
but if you use cold.
Everybody, yeah, you only use it for cold.
No, but if you use it, for instance, you might
Right,
need
right.
$1 of beer
Right,
or something.
right.
So you just rinse it, or you just...
Yes, according to the
It wasn't in there for
Halacha.
24
Technically,
hours.
that's all you need to do. Technically.
If the beer wasn't in there for
Right,
24 hours.
right. Well, because that's the Halacha. I mean, something that is used for cold water, just rinse it.
It wasn't even in there for 24
Erev
hours.
Pesach, everybody's machmir, as you know. They even clean the bathrooms, they clean everything. They do more than what you're supposed to. Chametz is asur b'mashu, we're extra strict. And the same is true with certain countertops. Are you going to cook on your countertop directly on it? You better not. You're going to put something hot on, even if it's granite. I mean, regardless, you're not going to put anything hot down on it, but you may. Well, let's say you did. You put something chametz already there too. You have no countertop left. So it's an extra chumrah. We cover it up. We pour hot water on it, so it shouldn't be in direct contact with any possible chametz that may still be there. And what you're putting down is hot, whether it's a pot or not. Even if it's hot food, we don't usually do that. But in case it may happen, we're always careful.
In
Right.
the Mahal, it's just a little amount.
Right.
That's less than a 60th of what
Yeah.
the answer is?
Very small amounts.
That it was already bottled because it was... Is that what he's trying to say?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, right. Not necessarily. But by the time you cook in that pot, you will for sure because you usually fill it to the top, to the brim, you usually use it b'shefa, you will for sure have enough against the Isser. In other words, you happen...
60.
Yeah.
The problem here isn't being mevatel Isser l'hatchila.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
I'm saying,
yeah,
that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, not necessarily being mevatel. I said so because we'll see that some question this.
But when he said
Yeah.
mi'at,
But me'at, because we know for a fact that it was a small amount, as opposed to using a pot over and over again.
And the small amount is relative. The contents, whatever.
Yes,
is
exactly. Yeah.
And that ratio between would be a
The
ratio
ratio is, of
sufficient.
course, shishim.
Shishim.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yes, yeah. Regardless, yeah. Right. It will always be the amount that's required. But the point here is that you don't have to do anything. You can actually use it. That's
And that is a problem because...
and this, you see how this halacha follows very naturally after Bittul Isser, right?
L'hatchila.
You see how this one follows, even though here I told you not to do it, here, you can do it. Why? It's a small amount. You're going to use so much, it's going to be canceled out anyway. But wait a minute, what about Bittul Isser? We'll talk about
And
that.
this is even by Isser.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Is that a real Bittul Isser? It's really not, but it appears to be. And the thing is here,
Because your intention is to be mevatel.
exactly. So it's not so much the Bittul Isser, even though that question is also raised here. Here it's a chidush. The chidush here really is that you can actually use a pot that has an Isser for your heter without being machshir. That's more of the chidush over here. Where do you take this from? So we have to go to the makor. And the makor has to do with the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. That here you have goyim using it for wine, and you could put water. So Rashi says no, that the water is the way he explains that adding water not for you to drink, but for milu ve'iroi. That's all you need to make this kankanim kosher for your use. And because the Gemara does mention about milu ve'iroi too. All right, that's Rashi. But the Ran, I'm sorry, before we go to the Ran, so that's with water. But
One quick,
yes.
to get from this Gemara to this din is a long way. Over there it was to cook.
No,
Here,
but
with
the
Isser being cooked.
yeah, but wait. We have to see all
Saying it's a
the
long way.
Rishonim. It is a little bit of a, but you'll see once we talk about what the Rishonim have to say about that. You'll see how it applies here. So before we go to the Ran, that's as far as the din of water. But there is agreement that if you go ahead and add sir or murias to the kankanim, brine, I don't know the translation of murias exactly, but similar. That kind of that is very, very hot in a sense, spicy. The sir or murias. If you put that into the
That was the Isser or that is the...
no, that's the heter. You put that in, that's okay, for sure. Why? Because that has a chemical compound somehow that burns any blias, any wine. It just destroys it.
So you're even allowed to consume it.
Yes. So you can put sir and murias. You would be able to put into this kankanim that once held wine of goyim, even though you've not done any hechsher to it, because the sir and murias destroys the tam or the blias of yain. Now, so that's basically the Poshup Pshat, the way Rashi learns. Let's go to the Ran. Ran says, no, the water, you can put water too, you don't have to put sir murias. The Ran says it's very simple. Anytime you put water into the kankanim, what water will do is it will be meifig. It will be meifig the tam of the yain. It will dilute it so much that it will weaken. In other words, it's still there, but it weakens it so much that it really is,
Doesn't factor in.
it doesn't factor in, exactly. That's all. And that's why you're allowed to do it.
isn't this what? That it,
No, the Gemara asks about beer.
the reason why I'm asking,
Yeah.
wine, put in kind of sauce. And
Right, exactly. Yeah.
When you put in water.
So you're beginning to see that this is part of the question with those cherry caskets or whatever barrels, whatever they call them. Yeah, that they put whiskey in. That's part of the question of what happens. So we will see, based on some of these Rishonim, what they have to say. We're not cooking in these barrels. They are blias, or are there blias? It might be very, very small. And even if they are they coming out? These are some of the questions. So here we have a Gemara that says, go ahead and just put in whatever you want, because, as the Ran explains in the case where even water is used, the water is meifik the tam of the any time that may be left over the wine, and it's not the wine doesn't factor in, like you said. It's not an issue. All right. But I want to point out the Ravid. The Ravid, which is really the more important source here, because that's what the Mechaber follows here. The Ravid and the Rabbi Elyahu and the Rashba says that this Gemara is not so pashut. This Gemara is a big chidush. It's not what the Ran says, just use water because, it will dilute the wine. No. This Gemara is a chidush. What's the chidush here? That is chadash. Here we have a chidush that we don't say that there's a bitul isur lechatchila here. That's the chidush of the Gemara. In other words, what's happening over here, regardless of how you explain it, what happens to the wine, what the Gemara is trying to tell us here is a chidush, that in this particular case, there's no problem of bitul isur lechatchila. Or being mevatel, however you accomplish it. That's not the issue here. It can be done in various ways, but what the Gemara wants to tell us is not that you go ahead and use it. No, that I'm learning from this. I'm allowed to be mevatel the isur lechatchila.
Rabbi Kin, but
Yes.
interestingly,
Yeah, that's a chidush. Yeah,
if Rashi's verse, if we go with Rashi's verse,
right,
that when the Gemara says putting in water, the water for consumption,
right.
then this would be a parallel case of Hagala, and which
Yes.
is not bitul isur lechatchila, I understand, from
Right.
Lepar, because we're putting into the container is not meant for them.
Right.
So bitul bahagala, bitul isur lechatchila doesn't apply. Into the Rashi here in the case of the Gemara, bitul equally not apply. Likewise, because you're not going to consume the water, Rashi says.
Right.
Right, but the Ran says you can the water.
Right. The Ran says yes.
So you take the Ravid and the Ran.
Yes. Between
That's
the two of
the
them. Yeah. So even though we know that there is a difference here, because it's an Isur Belua, it's a Blia here, versus an Isur falling into the pot and being Mevatalet, nonetheless, these Rishonim say that this is the Chiddush of the Gemara. That in this case, you can do it in this manner. Mm-hmm. In this manner. Okay? Yeah, no problem. All right. Now, remember, this din does not resemble our din in its entirety. The din of the Gemara, that is. Here we're talking about everything is cold. Here we're talking about cooking, actually. Right? We understand?
In other words, this is
The
cooking
din of the
the
Gemara,
Raisa, that is cooking the Rabbanon.
the din of the Gemara is not even talking about cooking. Just, we had wine, we have water, everything is cold. Still, the Ravid, the Rashba, they all learn that, there's a chiddush over here. Nevertheless, there's a chiddush here. But our din, we're going to see in the Mechaber, is a little bit different. But he uses that as the Makor. All right. So what's the connection? The connection is that if you have an Isur Mo'at over here, and you use the Kli B'Shefa, right, that it would have a similar halacha to over there, to the Gemara. Rosh says something a little bit different. The Rosh says that the yain, the wine that may still be there in the case of the Gemara, is poigem, the tam of the tzir and the murias. Any tam, it's poigem. You're putting in tzir and murias into this kankanim that held wine. That wine is poigem, the whole thing.
Why wouldn't water have to be,
If he's talking about the case of tzir and murias.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
Right. So the Rosh says it would be. He's not saying that it destroys the wine. On the contrary, the wine is no good here. The wine spoils your tziramuris. If anything, it's poigim the tziramuris. So it's not a. That's why he wants to say that's what the Gemara is saying. There's no chiddush here. It's just that in this particular scenario, the wine is okay. Whatever little bit of wine there is poigim the tziramuris. That's where you're allowed to put tziramuris. That's the way he explains it. All right. The Torah, which is what we need to know now, the Torah disagrees with the Rashba for a very interesting reason. He says, no, you can't do that. In other words, as far as which Rashba? With the Rashba of the Mechaber. Because the din that the Mechaber brings down, based on that Mekor in the Gemara, is based on what the Rashba says, right? The Rashba and everybody else that says basically that's a Chiddush. You can apply it here too. The Mechaber, in other words, did not put together this scenario himself. He took it from the Rashba. So the Tur, who's aware of the Rashba, who was a lot before him, disagrees. And he disagrees for a very good reason. He says there is a Gzera that you cannot use a Kli that's Eino Ben Yoima, or to Ben Yoima. This Kli, it has not been used for a while. Okay? You want to cook now, you want to make yourself dinner. The guy says, you know what? Here's my pot. Use it. Yeah, but you You cooked your bacon in this pot. I haven't used it for 3 months. It's pogum. Can you use it? No. You can't use it. You have to make a gala to it. I mean, if you want to use it, you have to be machshir it. Yeah, but it's pogum anyway. You're right. Pogum is pogum. But lechatchila you can't do it. Why? Otu ben yoima. You may come to use a kli that is ben yoima and you don't know. The same kli. One day maybe a ben yoima and you say, oh, well, you forgot. It was used this morning. So there is such a gzera of not using the kli, even though it's eina ben yoima, otu ben yoima. So the Tur basically says in the same way that we have a gzera of that nature, we should have a similar gzera here. Oh, I'm going to use a b'shefa, I'm going to pour a lot. Yeah, but you may end up using it for a smaller amount.
Ben yom or atu ben yom?
Like similar to the adu ben yom or atu ben yom, here too. We should make a gzera. Who says that this should be allowed? Just because you're using it for shefa? Maybe you won't one day use it with shefa. You follow? Very simple. Yeah. But of course, the Bes Yosef, who's on the side of the Tur, has a chance to respond. He was somewhat after the Tur, and he wrote his commentary on the Tur. And he says, no, I like what the Rashba says. It's not exactly the same. You cannot make this kind of a gzera here.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so the Beis Yosef says like this. That gzera is understood. It happens. It could easily happen. Here, this keli is always used b'shefa. This is a keli that is always used b'shefa. You may is not shayach to say, because you don't. Somebody might decide to. You don't make zeros for that. You just don't. If there's no regulus, it's never used. You know what this reminds me like? You just asked about the kos for Pesach. Do you have to make hagala to it, the gevia? Have you ever used it for hot soup? Yeah. No. Hot wine? For sure not. We never use it for hot. It's not used.
And it's never used to 24 hours.
Exactly.
Minutes
yeah.
But that would be true of the barrels as well. They're used for wine.
Yeah.
They don't put a little, when they're storing those things, they start, they're always full.
No, that's with them, yeah. But I'm saying with us here in the halacha of the mechaber, if you have a kli that's always used b'shefa, you're not going to take it out to use it for a small amount that will not have enough to be mevatel the isur.
That's why I thought the example that the Gemara gave was of pearls.
Right.
Because that's almost always shefa.
Well,
when they start, they use they fill the barrel.
Yeah. But that was not really the connection or the similarity here. That was the Rabbah, the Rashba says that's the chiddush. You can do it lechatchila. So here too you can do it lechatchila only because you know that through your actions nothing will happen. And there too nothing will happen. However you explain it, either you're being mevatel completely, that's like they're saying that's the chiddush. Through your actions you're being mevatel the isser that is there, the little bit of isser, maybe there. Or through the din of pogom, or the din of dilution, or you're diluting it. Regardless, you're doing it lechatchila. Here you can do it lechatchila too. We're not concerned that you're ever going to use a smaller amount. So therefore, if we're not concerned, then why should we make a gzera? It's not shayach. It's never done. That's all. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rashba, like the Ran, like the Prichodosh, the Vilna Gaon says the same thing. The Taz and Shach over here don't like it. They go like the Tur, believe it or not. This is one more time an example of Shach and Taz saying, no, we're not going to go with the Bechaber. We're going to go with the Tur. And by the Pri Megadim, however, there's no Ramahi, by the way. The Pri Megadim says he would allow for it if it's Pogum. In other words, if this particular keli is anyway Pogum,
it was used more than 24 hours ago.
Exactly. Then you could rely on this.
So you're saying you don't need to not use the Eno Ben Yoma, Atu Ben Yoma, in the case of,
exactly. You have Shefa anyway, and if the Kli is Pogum, because it's Eno Ben Yoma, I believe the Pri Megadim says it would be okay in that case. That's the only case where he would allow for it.
Going back to your example of guys.
Right.
You can't rely upon him, he can't give ages.
No, but there's no difference whether it was Ben Yoma or not Ben Yoma. Remember, it was just used to store wine. It was not cooked. Yeah. And it was used many times, perhaps. So that was the chiddush. Why should it work? So depending on how you learn, is it the wine that's pug in the murius? Is it the murius that has a compound in it that destroys the wine? Or is it just the chiddush, like they're saying? It's a chiddush that you can be mevatel the iser here. Whatever it is, you're being mevatel the iser by pouring whatever it is that you're pouring. So anyway, before we go to the next siman, just a little bit more about this one here. What's the question on the Rashba here? Who's basically the one that put together this scenario? Even though that's the chiddush, even though they say that that's the chiddush of the Gemara, how could you? What difference is it from the other halachas where we say we're not allowed to be mevatel isur lechatchila? In other words, what makes this different? It's in the end, it's a bitul isur lechatchila in the Kli Shefa. So the only thing you could say, the simple explanation is that we're talking about an isur balua, not an isur be'ein. In other words, you can't eat it. You can't eat here the isur. You're not eating the isur. What are you worried about? You're worried about an isur balua. Well, if you're worried about the isur balua, what will happen to this isur balua? It may come out in the cooking process and eventually be absorbed into the food. But that won't happen if you're using shefa. So, in other words, if that's your only concern, that's never going to happen. But, of course, if it were to be a smaller amount, then you would have the issue of bitul isur lechatchila. You wouldn't be able to do it. Whatever will come out, and you're trying to mevatel it. Yeah.
Isn't, in a way, a case that is similar to... Remember, we had such a case where the Taz says you're allowed to do
right,
that.
there you're being metaken the dvash.
Because you're being metaken the dvash, and you have no intention of destroying the taste effects, to be
right.
mevatel the taste of
Your
the
actions are not exactly intended to be mevatel the isur. Right.
Yeah. Here it is a very similar
But
case.
here it is.
Actually, even a weaker case, because we're talking about belief and not about the presence of the...
It could be. That's if you go by what the Gemara says, it could be that's the chiddush. In reality, it is different. That's the way I learned it. That it's really a bliyah. But nevertheless, the question is a good question on the Rashba. How should this be different? So that's the explanation, that it is a weaker form of bitul isur, because it's not a real isur, be'ein at least. You could concern that it may come out. If it's a shefa keli, it's never going to be a concern. Masha'inkin, if it's a small keli. If it's a small keli, then of course it would be different. So how do we paskin here? We paskin that they have some meruba for sure, or in a kli cheres, which is difficult to make hagala to it, and you have an isu me'at nivla, you can definitely rely on a keli that you use b'shefa. That's what the Aruch HaShulchan brings down. The Pri Megadim doesn't really make any exceptions, I think, except for if it's pogum. Only if it's pogum, I believe he makes exception. Otherwise, even in the hefset, he wouldn't allow it. If it's not pogum, no. But the la'achar me'es la'es, in other words, if it's eina ben yomo, it's a klichera situation, it's a hefset beruba situation, you have on who to rely here, no problem. So that does it for Siman Sadik Test, Siman Kuf. Very interesting Siman, and I'm already letting you know now that even though it's a small one, there's a lot going on here, especially in the end. And I'll tell you what it's all about. The big deal will concern bugs and worms. That's why I say there's a lot going on. There really is not that much. It's a very interesting sugya of birya, but if you want to, next week we'll get into, partially of course, the sugya of worms and bugs, which is something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Not just before Pesach when you wash and rinse your romaine lettuce. Especially in humid areas like the East Coast and Eretz Yisrael, where they even have more of an infestation in fruits and vegetables, it becomes a big problem. Lately they've had some worms in fish. What do you say about worms in fish? So actually, if you want to learn the halachas, you can go back and you will see the halachas. Pei Dalet for the most part, I think. Let me see if there's any other. Yeah, Pei Dalet for the most part is Pei Dalet. If you're interested in looking into more in depth, but that's just a small part of the Siman. So, Siman Kuf is about a birya. The birya is a filu be'elef lo bottle. So let me give you an introduction, a little bit about shi'urim of bittul. Even though we've discussed it a little bit in the past, we'll refresh our memory. Chazal were machmir in certain shi'urim much more than the Torah, because of the seriousness of the Isser. For example, some Isurim are also b'mashahu, even a little bit. 3 examples of it are Chometz on Pesach, you have Yain Nesach, and you have Avodah Zarah. It's also afilu b'mashahu. Because of the severity of the Isser, it's pretty much not bottle. Also, that's what also b'mashahu means. Then you have some Isurim that are not typical. In other words, not typical meaning that they're not bottle the regular shishim, because it's not just a matter of tam, but they require either 100 or 200. And we covered this a little bit when we gave examples of truma and orla and kilei akerem. As the Mishnah points out, the chachamim, because these are a little bit more serious, we learn from a pasuk and so forth, the chachamim made the requirement to be mevatel them a lot stricter. Then you have Isurim that because of their chashivas, because of their importance, they're not bottle, not even in 1,000. In other words, it's similar to the one that is not even bottle b'mashu, which is interesting, that they say it's not even in 1,000. But here they make a distinction is because of their chashivas, because of their importance. Not because they're so serious, but because of there's something important about them. One of them is a birya. A birya means a creature, but it's more than just a creature, and we'll talk about that soon. The other one is chaticha ruyo leiskabet, which we'll eventually learn. Right? We have that in Kuf Aleph, and another one in Kuf Beis, which is called davar sheyesh lo matirin. And davar sheyesh lo matirin means, eventually at some point it's going to be mutter anyway. So therefore, the laws or halachas of bittul will not apply to it. Then we have a davar shebeminyan also, that is counted, also because of chashivas. That's another one. Yeah. So that is also another example. Because of the importance of it, it's not a bottle afilu be'elef. And you will find through Yore Deah, through Taaruvot, some halachas that concern, which we've already learned partially, part of it in Sadiches, that there are some food items, some enzymes, or some spices or whatever, that because of they enhance the flavoring of the food, or they give off a very strong taste, or they are the enzymes that make the cheese, the ramamid, right? Because of their function, or because of how they operate, they are not going to be bottled so quickly. There's a whole machlokes about something called chazusa also, appearance. Have you seen that a little bit? Chazusa, the appearance of, in other words, it gives something to the food. Yeah, all the colorations and all these kinds of things. Exactly. Yeah. It would be an issue. It depends if that's what you intend to do, or if it happens as a result of mixing it, but not necessarily that that's what you want it to be. So there are various food items that, even though they should be, and they are really, bottle beroiv or beshishin, depending on what's involved, but because of what they do to the food, they have a certain chashivas. Now, what's interesting about one of them, that's metabel. Mechametz is the other one. Mechametz is the one that ferments, causes it to ferment. Like yeast. It's a very significant ingredient. It causes the fermentation. But metabel is one that we covered a little bit, and I almost forgot about it. In Tzadik Ches, there's a machlokes between the Shach and Rabbi Kiva Eger on this metabel that is enhancing the flavor, and it's not going to dissipate so quickly. That we said it's not bottle b'shishin. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Is that a din of the Raisa or the Rabbanan? Mm-hmm. Shach says it's a Rabbanan. Rabbi Kiva says no, the Raisa, because it's not gone. The fact is, it's there. So it should be a deraisa. So that's an example of metabel, flavoring, to the degree of that it enhances it, or it's so strong that it doesn't go away, that you can't apply the rule of shishin to it, because it just won't go away. So there's a question if that's the raisa of the Rabbanan, that it's not bottled, until the point, of course, that it's completely gone. All right. But I just wanted to bring that up to remind ourselves that we've covered that a little bit. But there's a davar of Muhammad, which is how you make cheese, that even though it might be so minute, but because of its function, because of what it does, it's not bottled afilu be'elef. Okay, so these are all examples of isurim that are not typical, that their share of bitul is greater, or they're just not bottled. But what's interesting is about birya, because that's what we're learning right now. Birya afilu be'elef lo bottled. Does it say that anywhere in the Gemara? That afilu be'elef lo bottled? No, it doesn't say that anywhere. You try to look it up. But it's mashma like that from the Gemara. In other words, if you learn the whole sugya there in Chulin, you will see that it's understood that no matter what you do, it's not bottled. But does it say that it's not bottled afilu be'elef? No. That's what's interesting. So that's what the poskim say. It doesn't say that anywhere, that afilu be'elef lo bottled. And that's a very important point, that the fact that he doesn't say it. Well, because not everybody agrees with this halacha that birya afilu be'elef lo bottled.
But it's implied.
It's implied from this Gemara. That's it. That birya, for reasons that we will explain, is not bottled afilu be'elef. So before we get to the other ones who say that's not exactly so, let's try to understand what's going on with the birya. The halacha by birya is that even if you were to eat less than a kazais, you would get malchus. Remember the famous shear of kazais? You could eat in the vela. In order to get malchus, there has to be a kazais.
Right.
That's the din. Halacha l'moishe b'sinai shi'urim.
That you're not allowed to eat less.
Chatzi shir, that's something else.
But you don't get more.
Right. The shear for getting malchus is kazais. For a birya, what's a birya? A birya is sometimes smaller than a kazais to begin with. A bug, a cockroach. Let's say cockroach. No. That's right. It's not the thing. But it's not a kazais. Hope not. Anyway, guess what? Even though there's no kazais there, it's a birya, you get malchus for it. For a birya, and we haven't described yet all the conditions for a birya, but this is an important point that there's pretty much agreement with, that a birya is significant, even though it's small. We learn out that when the Torah said don't eat, it did not distinguish between how big it needs to be. When the Torah says don't eat this, and it meant an ant or a bug or anything that is a creature that is forbidden for us to eat, when it talked about the creature, it did not specify the size. And therefore, since it did not specify the size of the creature, you get malchus even if it's a small little bug, even if there's no kazais. No, not parts of the bug. The bug itself, the entire bug.
The entire bug?
Yes, you
or
have to
it
eat
has to be whole at the time you chop off a piece of it?
No, we'll get to that. We didn't talk about the conditions of the birya yet. Right now, I'm just saying, eating the bug, the way it is.
But if there's only a head of a bug,
No, it would. Right now, we're talking about the whole bug. That's the din of getting malchus, even if it's less than kazais, because it's a birya. All right. So because that's what's understood from the Torah's prohibition, that there's no distinction, there's no difference of what the size is, this is what's prohibited. So Chazal learned from that in the same way the Torah does not distinguish and is as strict with small sizes, we're going to be strict about bittul as well. Alright? In the same way the Torah is makbid even on a small size, because that's what a birya is, in this particular case of birya, we're not going to be so lenient with bittul either.
It's not the Torah by a
chashivas, yeah, because
and this chashivas prevents a bittul
bittul
from being
right.
applicable.
Yeah, exactly. So what do we see so far?
But why should it prevent?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, that's what it doesn't say that anywhere. You're right. That's what I began to say. It doesn't really say. It's just inferred like that. But because of the chashivas, there are certain things that the Chazal, and this is not the only one, right? They said, you know what? This is significant. It's a significant isser. Bittul won't apply. Now, this bittul won't apply is a derabbanan, by the way, because it's batal and roiv, just like anything else. Therefore, since it's a derabbanan, guess what? If you ever have a question or a suffix, if something is a birya, it's a suffix derabbanan. Okay?
And it's not one of those that we're machmir.
Right. Yeah. But that's basically the connection between the not being batal afilu be'elev, because the Torah did not distinguish between the sides. Now, even though that's what's inferred, there is a deah. You can find it's one of the Balatoises, Rabbeinu Shimshon, and the Rashba, I think too, that a birya can be batal close to 1,000. To be exact, 960. Where did they get this number 960 from? Well, it's simple arithmetic. The Gemara there discusses tzir of tameh. Where does tzir come from, by the way? From a fish. So from a non-kosher fish. The tzir is so strong, we know tzir is strong, that you need 16 times of kosher tzir to cancel it out.
What is
The brine, I think it's called in English, right? Yeah. The tzir is so strong, the tzir of the dag is so strong that you need 16 times of heter to cancel it out.
In other words, this is a...
Huh?
Is this called...
Yeah. But it's so strong, the tam, that you need 16 times. All right?
So roiv is not sufficient. You know what I mean? But we know it would be rov. No?
Yeah, right. So
And
it's
16
not enough.
You need the rabbanon, is that right?
16?
Yeah.
Rabbanan.
Done.
Rabbanan, yeah. But otherwise, you may need 60, actually. Well, well, depending if there's time or not. But anyway, you need 16 times. So they said, since we need 16 times against the tzir itself, to mevatel the tzir, you will need 16 times 60, the fish, right, to be mevatel the birya.
Okay, I'm twice...
Right? Yeah. So here you need 16. Ordinarily, we need 60 against the real Isser. This is a birya. You're going to need 16 times 60 to be mevatel the birya.
So
16 times 60 is 960.
Yes,
that's how you get 960.
100%. But
Right.
So what was that mevatel with the 6?
The tzir. Since we find that that's the shear, we find that that's the shear the Gemara requires for tzir. That's, for some reason, that's the shear that they came up with.
But why don't I require here? I thought any 60 to
Right.
rabbanon.
That's what they came up with. That's the shears that's sufficient to be mevatel. That's how much you need to be mevatel the tzir with other tzir. So
therefore, against the fish itself, you need 60 times 16.
exactly.
So normally,
If it's a birya, in this case, yeah, it's a birya.
So normally, but this is one opinion. This is
Yeah. Not everybody follows this opinion, but you will see. Eventually, we'll talk about it next week. This is a very important opinion, because when it comes to using certain food items that may be infested, we have to rely on certain lenience to allow ourselves to eat something, even though there's a chance that there may be, but we haven't seen it. In other words, we check, but certain times we don't check. And the not checking has to do with what? Well, it has to do, first of all, if there's a chazaka or not. We're going to learn about chazaka. If you found 3 bugs in something, you buy raspberries these days. Raspberries, right? Are you going to check them? You should. You have to? Huh? What do you say?
You have to.
You should. Okay? It all depends. What if you checked a couple and you don't find any? You bought several crates, right? There's an union of chazaka. If I don't find in a cup, I don't have to check everything. Only something that has a chazaka, there's always bugs there. Or if I found a certain amount, then I have to check everything else. So we'll talk a little bit about that, when we get into that.
Isn't that what they do in restaurants? Let's say salad. They
Right.
get green salad.
Okay.
So they will check 3 heads out of the package.
Yes, exactly.
And if all 3 of them are
Exactly,
free,
yeah.
then the restaurants are...
Exactly. Depending on
Somebody know who
Right.
agency for
Yes.
vegetables and
Sure. So there's no doubt. I have found recent aphids or whatever you call them in the raspberries, but not as many, perhaps, as I have found in. But it was something else that I was checking that was much more infested.
Blueberries and blackberries.
people were saying that you can't eat them at all anymore because they're just such a
Well, what happens is like this with raspberries. one of the ways of checking them, one of the ways of checking certain vegetables or fruits is by throwing it down on a carton where you can actually see. If you're going to do that to the raspberry, you're going to smash it.
but if you had a chazaka, you'd only have to do a 2%,
right?
And you could say the rest.
That's
but
true.
There's some people who are saying not at all.
No. Yes, you can. And the problem is that there's different kind of bugs with different kinds of fruits and vegetables. In the raspberry, it happens to be like a little white worm. You will see it deep down, going in. And you really have to, it's hard to see. You really have to look close. And people will not check it that well sometimes. And therefore they say, might as well not buy it. But no, you can if you know how to check it very well. If you know how to rinse it well, some things with soap take care of it, some things with shaking it. There's a whole list of ways on how to check different kinds of fruits and vegetables. Almost. And in some areas, there's less problems than in other areas. There's no doubt that our area is not as infested as the East Coast. There's no doubt about it. But nevertheless, you still find different kinds of bugs. So you have to check, but if you've done your checking and there isn't, you can go ahead and eat it. Still, I would be careful. I would still rinse it well and do everything that is normal to do. Yeah. So anyway, this is a sugya that is related to what we will be learning because we're talking about a birya here. One type of birya. All right, so what is a birya? So the Mechaber begins in Seif Aleph as follows. Birya, the haino, kegon nemolo, an ant. Of tome, an impure bird, unclean bird. A raven, right? Gida nosha, the sciatic nerve. Ever minachai. Does everybody here know what an ever minachai is? A limb from a living animal. Do you know that there are still some Chinese and possibly Koreans that eat ever minachai? They tie a monkey underneath the table. They open up the skull and they spoon up the brains. That's ever minachai.
Sure.
There are all kinds of ever minachai. But anyway, the ever minachai is a limb of a living animal that cut off while the animal was alive before shechita. That's a birya. Beitza sheyesh bo efroach, an egg that has a partially developed chick. There's a difference between if it's partially developed or fully developed, whether it's an isur d'Rabbanan or an isur d'Oraisa. V'chayotze bahem. Similar things to these, afilu be'elef lo batela. The ein lo din birya, it will not have a din of a birya. Elam kinu dava shaya b'chiyus. Now he starts giving conditions, the criteria for a birya. Even though I just gave you examples, he says, even these examples will not necessarily always be a birya unless the 4 conditions are met. Elam kinu dava shehaya b'chiyus. It had life to it, a living thing, as opposed to what? As opposed to a grain of wheat, which may be usher. Yeah, but it's not something that's alive or that was alive.
The partially developed chick alive.
Right? So they ask a question about that. There's a lot of questions about the Mechaber's example of Beitza Sheish Bo Efroach. What's the problem here? But it has other conditions. We'll see. So he says, to exclude a chita, a grain of wheat that is an isser. It has to be something that was always forbidden from the very beginning. What does that come to exclude? It comes to exclude a chicken, for example, that became an avela or a treifa. At one time it was permissible. Now it's forbidden for me to eat. So that's not a good example of a birya. So even though we've talked about chickens, entire chickens getting mixed up that are not kosher with other chickens, they will not necessarily pose a problem because of birya, because of other issues. Because a kosher bird does not fall under the conditions of a birya because it is only now possibly not kosher, but once upon a time it was a kosher bird. It would have to have been forbidden from the very start.
Let's say if it was the mother was already treif, the mother bird.
Right.
So the thing comes out from a treif itself, not the sugar.
Right, obviously.
So such a chick would be, as an individual, would be on.
Yes, from
birth.
birth.
As a species, would be a chicken. So I'm wondering whether it on the individual or on the species.
Yeah, there's a question that's raised about something like that. From what point does it really begin? It intrinsically, it's usher in itself. In other words, which is basically what we say, or as a result of coming from somewhere else. In this case, the way we learn is it in itself would have to be usher. Yes. But that's a good question because they discuss it. So far we said the several conditions, which were: one, it has life. It was something that was usher from the beginning, to exclude an of tohor shenisnabel, or to exclude a shor haniskal, an ox that is being taken to skila, being put to death because it killed. Ken tzorach sheyeh davar sholem, she'im yichalek in shmor. It has to be something that's complete, that if you were to divide it or cut it up, it would lose its name. It would no longer be called the same. Lafuke chelev. Chelev will always be called chelev. Chicken will be a part of a chicken, a leg of a chicken. It doesn't have the same name. The issa would always have to, in other words, the birya has to be something that if you cut it up, it's no longer the same name.
An amoeba then, really.
Yeah. What would it be then?
Amoeba always be an amoeba.
Right, okay, yes, right. V'chein tzorah, no, if you cut it up, it's a piece of something, a piece of worm, yeah.
No, because I'm a
Right. V'chein tzorach sheyeh shalom, and it also has to be at the time that we are questioning, it has to be shalom, it has to be intact, as opposed to crushed. These are the four conditions. Now, what's important to keep in mind here is, and hopefully you will be reviewing these halachas, is that a very important idea I find is that these four are not necessarily agreed upon by all Rishonim. Because think about Ever Menachai and Gid HaNosha for a moment. Ever Menachai and Gid HaNosha are not really things that are alive. And one of the conditions that the Mechaber brings here is that it has chiyus. So it appears to be that the Mechaber is going like certain Rishonim, of course, that either present all of them, or he's trying to include the description of every one. You know, it was the Rosh brings certain criteria, the Ran brings other criteria, and it's all listed. We don't really have the time right now to go through each one, because I want to just present you the general halacha. But if you go through the Rishonim, you will see that each one from the Gemara learns different specifics or different criteria of what a birya really is. They're not all necessarily say, I need all four, even though the Mechaber says you do. Okay?
The Zeus cannot be at the time solid.
No, of course
It
not.
had to be at one point.
At one point,
At
yes.
one-
At one point, yes. Right. And
So he's basically because he's narrowing down what qualifies.
well, not really.
You
Well,
have to
yes and
fulfill all
no.
four.
Yes and no, because remember, he's including Gid HaNosha and Neva Menachai, even though they're not Chiyas. So why are they also? Because they resemble Chiyas, because they come from a living thing, or for other reasons that are mentioned, because they are important in some ways. They are significant, like Gid HaNosha. The Gid HaNosha, the Torah forbids it from the very start, not later, right? It's always Asr. So even though it doesn't have the Chiyas part, it has the other criteria.
In Hanasha?
No, that's what we're going to see the Ramah. The Ramah talks about what portion is Asr as a birya. You have to have the main, I don't know how it's called in English. The Ikar Gid HaNosha, the Ramah says, Eino elo ala kaf bilvad. The kaf, in other words,
Where the Iker Isser.
where the Ikar Isser is of the birya.
Before we get there,
The bigger part, not just the tendons.
saying that the Mechaber is not saying have all four
He is,
criteria?
yes. The Mechaber, yes. The Mechaber says you need all four.
So he's using the subset of what everyone else
Right,
is
whatever else wants it, but you will not necessarily find that all the Rishonim say these are the criteria. Right. In all four. Because otherwise, how do you explain Gid HaNosha and Neva Menachai? It doesn't really fit in. That's because there's another criteria called, She'asu b'tchilas b'riyasai, Not really. No, it's because there's other definitions of what makes a beer. It's not necessarily that it has chiyus. So the Ramah just adds about the Gid HaNosha, that's the kaf bilvad, vehu keroichav daled its voice, it's about 4 its voice with, the mushalim mikra birya, and if it's complete, it's called a birya. All right, so before we just go to we won't cover the other seifim until next week, but just a little bit about this first seif. The Mechaber himself points out what the criteria is. What do we know so far? We know that if the birya is not complete, not intact, that will render it not a birya. That we do know.
So
So therefore, if you have part of a cockroach, not the entire cockroach, it's not a birya.
but if I had the cockroach
Right.
and I put it
Right.
and it dissolved into it,
Right.
you're telling me then
That's the next seif. The next seif talks about what happens nevertheless,
Okay.
that it fell in. How do I deal with it? Can I filter it out? Can I strain it actually, or not? If you can strain it, you're okay.
At some point in time,
If you cannot, you're in trouble if it's all mixed in and it's intact. You can't see it. That's what we're talking about.
at some point,
Maybe you'll be able to see the fly. Usually when you're looking at your soup, you can tell, hopefully, oh, what's this?
well,
A bug.
When you can't,
And by the way, on Shabbos, you know how to remove a bug from a soup, right? Together with a little bit of the soup.
other way.
Well, yeah. And whenever we talk about bugs, there's always this joke about the Englishman, the German, the French, and the Chinese. They're drinking beer, and a fly fell into the beer. And the Frenchman saw that, and he says, oh, no, we got rid of the beer. Can't drink that. The Englishman just took out the bug and drank the beer. The German drank the beer with the fly. The Chinese threw out the beer and ate the fly. Anyway, so people have different attitudes towards these things, but of course we're Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh Anshe Kodesh Tiyum Li. We're a holy nation. We stay away from molded bugs and all these creatures.
The question is, at some point in time, it will become cut up, either through the chewing or through
Yes,
cutting
the
it with
beer
a
will
knife
be
and
cut up,
fork,
right?
or cutting it with a knife and fork.
Sure.
So, at which point in time it stop being a? I mean, if lehatchila what is being served is the leg of the cockroach.
Then it's not a beer.
Now, if what is being served is the whole cockroach, and now one takes a fork and cuts a leg off of it,
Yeah.
it's dead. It's dead right now.
Yeah, but it's also
So
to
now
eat.
this leg has the din of bria or not?
Well, sure. The din of beer is a gabi bittul. We're concerned here about bittul because in order for you to be over on eating the birya, you would have to eat the entire birya. Okay. There is a question, however, an interesting question about Ever Min HaChai in the birya. Okay. We know what a birya is now. We know what Ever Min HaChai is, right? Ever Min HaChai, by the way, just to let you know, does not apply to fish. Technically, you take out a fish from the water, you can eat it. Don't do it because you're over and about the shaktsua.
Is it something disgusting?
You have to hit it. You have to let it die before you eat it. But there are going that just take it out and bite it. But they're not even though Bnei Noach, by the way, one of the 7 Ol Karlas is Ever Min HaChai, it doesn't apply to fish. Neither does it apply, Ever Min HaChai does not apply to a non-kosher animal. Only to kosher animals. For us. For them, I think it does, yes. Regardless. But for us, it applies, and this is an important idea because of what I'm going to say next. It only applies to the kosher species, Ever Min HaChai. Now, so there's a question, the Gabi Ever Min HaChai. Ever Min HaChai, we know in order to be over on the Isra of Ever Min HaChai, you have to eat a kazais, just like anything else. We say that Ever Min HaChai is a birya, that's the Gabi Bittul. The Gabi the din of Bittul, because it's not a real birya in the sense that, it's a small little animal. Ever Min HaChai is just like any other Isra legabe, how much do I need to eat? It says, anytime it says don't eat, we apply the rule of kazais. So what's the chashivas of Ever Min HaChai? That it's not botel afilu be'elef. Okay. And it's a separate Isra called Ever Min HaChai. As opposed to
the you for the one cockroach.
What's that?
If you eat one cockroach, you'll be high.
Right. No, you do, because it's a birya, remember? Even though it's less than a kazait. If it's a birya, forget about Ever Min HaChai for a second. Birya, even if it's small, it's also for me to eat, even if it's less than kazais. Otherwise, any nevelas, any other isurim of kashrus, I need to eat a kazais. So there's a machloikis, a question about Ever Min HaChai that is less than a kazais.
Ever Min HaChai, were the animals less than a kazais, or were the Aver?
No, the Ever Min HaChai is less than a kazais. Is that called a birya or not?
Are we talking about the whole Aver or a piece?
The whole Aver. Ever Min HaChai, remember, what do we say Ever Min HaChai? We said Ever Min HaChai is a birya.
Right.
Okay? So is an Ever Min HaChai that's less than a kazais a birya? One more time. Ever Min HaChai, to eat it, I need a kazais. Birya doesn't have to be a kazais because it's a birya. What happens with an Ever min achai of something that is less than a kazais?
So I have a cow. Someone unfortunately chopped off a cow. That's now an Ever min achai. Now he puts a less than a kazais piece from that leg on my. The question is, if I were to eat, would I receive malchus or right? Is that the question? We're not allowed to eat it anyway.
Right.
But would I receive malchus?
Right.
Or are we talking about a leg of an ant, where the ant itself is less than a kazais? And now, if it's a leg from an ant that's still alive, would this leg of an ant that's still alive, even though the bria itself is less than a kazais, would this of an ant be caused a malchus?
Yeah, there's two ways to learn this machlokes. The way that I understood this machlokes is like this. I know that I cannot eat Ever min achai. In other words, regardless, it's an issue. The issue of eating Ever min achai is an issue in itself. However, in order for me to transgress and get malchus, it has to be kazais. Okay? A birya concerns me legabe hilchas bitul here, that it's not batal fil be'alef. Plus, it concerns me that even if this is a small little bug less than a kazais, that I'm over on it, even there's no kazais.
And there'll be malchus.
Yes, and there'll be malchus. Now, so there's a question, there's a machlokes, and we have to look into it a little bit more, is what happens legabe Ever min achai that is less min a kazais? Do we call it a birya?
So is the animal less than kazais, or is the less than
Oh. So that's what I wasn't sure. That's what I was not sure exactly. Let's say you take the aver. Let's say you take the aver of a of a small little bird,
Grasshopper.
Right.
There are kosher grasshoppers.
We said aver min achai is a birya. Does that mean an aver min achai that is less than a kazais is also a birya? Does that mean that it's only the aver min achai of a creature that is less than a kazais to begin with? Or does it actually mean that we have here a piece of the Ever min achai of a regular big animal?
The piece is less than
and the piece is less than a kazais. Does that still have a din of a birya? Now, lechora, that's not really the case. That's not really the question. I can't seem to think that should be the question, because anytime you just take a piece, it loses the chashivas of a birya. So I don't think that that's what it's relating to. I think the machlokes is talking about just a real aver that's intact, that is less than a kazais. You see what I mean? That's why I think
aver is intact.
The aver is intact. It has to be intact. Otherwise, if you take a piece, it loses the whole chashivas. So it's not talking about that. It must be here that there's a machlokes on whether the aver itself, if it has a din of a birya or not. Because we said that Ever min achai is a birya. So what if it's less than a kazais? So the crazy places says that it's still called a birya. And there's others that hold that it's not. Has no chashivas. Yeah, but anyway, I saw one more point, and with this maybe we'll finish for now. And this one I had a little bit of a problem. This one is brought down in the Sifsei Das. You've heard of him?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What happens with the din of Ever min achai in a chaya tehora? Ever min achai is shayach by a chaya tehora, right? So you have Ever min achai in a chaya tehora. Chaya tmeya, you don't have a din of Ever min achai. So therefore, do you have a din birya on Ever min achai of a chaya tmeya?
How would you?
He says, so Sifsei Das again. Sifsei Das says Ever min achai is a din in a chaya tehora, right? It's a birya. Therefore, if you ask me by a chaya tmeya, the Ever min achai does not have a din of birya. I will tell you that the Ever min achai in a chaya tmeya does not have a birya, din of birya. Okay? Now that's important, right? Why is that important? Because we're talking about bittul here, talking about Ever min achai being a birya. But if it's an Ever min achai of a chaya tmeya, it doesn't have a din of birya. It has the regular dinim of bittul. And when I saw that, I said, "What's the chiddush over here? It's not shayach at all. What's the chiddush? It's pashut. Since there's no din of Ever min achai to begin with on a chaya tmeya, why should I say that there should be a din of birya?"
Well, that's the question. But
No. That wasn't the question. He just says, you know what? Let me tell you that even though we just said that Ever Min HaChai is a birya, that's B'chayet Tehora. B'chayet Meir, there's no din birya on the Ever Min HaChai. There's no even Ever Min HaChai.
So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Maybe here he means not the Isser of an Ever. The Isser of Emena is implied by the Isser.
That we know. That's
but
the first halacha.
Comes from an animal that is high.
Right.
So, Metzias-wise, it's an Ever Min HaChai, even though Isser of Ever Min HaChai doesn't apply. So why shouldn't there be a opinion of Bria regarding the Metzias of an Ever that came from a Chaya that's high, even though the Isser of Ever Min HaChai doesn't apply?
You're right. You can say that. Perhaps this is not related. Even though there's no din of Ever Min HaChai, but it's a birya, it's a Metzias.
It's a foreleg of a living animal, so...
But it's a birya. Right, you're right. That must be what he was thinking of. But l'chora, I think it is related. I wanted to say that it is related, because if once you say that there's no din of Ever Min HaChai to begin with on something, then it's not called Ever Min HaChai.
What's the source for it?
We're saying Ever Min HaChai is also a birya. But if something is not an Ever Min HaChai, there's no Ever Min HaChai, there's not a part, why should you say that it's a din of birya?
Where does it get to Chashivah? There's no
exactly.
Ever Min HaChai. Right.
But anyway, he agrees that there isn't. I would just think that maybe...
Why would
you even mention that? It's understood. But apparently you're right too. Maybe nevertheless, it has a certain Chashivas on its own. Right, so possibly. But that's the difference between Chaya Tehora and Chaya Tmeya, is that obviously when it comes to Ever Min HaChai, there's different halachas. But birya would especially apply only to things that are not kosher, for the most part. Because if you're talking about something that is kosher, even though now it's an avela, what's the problem with an avela? It was kosher to begin with. It has to have been something asur from the very start. So now that something is not kosher does not mean that it's a birya. So from the way the Rishonim learn, you need to have these various criteria, various conditions, in order to have something called a birya, that it will not be batel afilu be'elav. And we go, of course, by the din of afilu be'elav. We don't use that Rabbeinu Shimshon, unless, as we will see, there are situations that we can use it to mitigate the Isser. But otherwise, when you do have that kind of a situation, you may have to throw out the whole thing. If you can see the Isser, unless you can remove the Isser, and then you only deal with the Plita. The Plita, which is, by the way, what some want to say in learning Pshat in the Gemara, or learning Pshat with Rabbeinu Shimshon, I think, that sometimes you only have an issue of the Plita, but the birya itself is not batel. The Plita can be batel. The time that comes out of... And by the way, with bugs, as we will see, it's usually not a problem anyway, because it's tam nefgam. You may not want to eat it because, there's a bug in there. There was a bug in there. But it's gone. You don't feel anything. You just took it out. A lot of people are not going to eat that soup. Right? But we have to know what the halacha is in case you made a big pot. And this is not a question of shefa here, because you saw the bug, so you took out the bug. But what do you do with the rest of it? No, there's no tam. You don't have to worry about the tam. What if there's some legs there left behind? Well, legs is not the entire bug. But don't tell anybody that they're still there. Anyway, we'll continue next week.